Hi, everybody. A couple of reminders before we get started. First off, Tech Jobs console is due today. I demoed some people on Monday, which is great. If you didn't demo yet, then hopefully you're ready today. And if you're not quite there yet, let us know what we can do to help you out so that we can get that one set up, because there's going to be more assignments coming along right behind it. Another thing that I was supposed to tell you about. Oh yeah, Monday is the national holiday, so you're welcome to come here if you want, but the doors are going to be locked and the building's going to be empty, so I would stay at home if I were you and have a cookout or something. That sounds like a good thing to do on Memorial Day. That's what I'll be doing. No class Monday, but we will meet again 1 week from today on Thursday, so enjoy your day off. Any questions before we hop into today's material? All right, cool. So today we introduced very important component of our web apps. This is something that we actually saw in Unit 2 with Flask, right? But like most things that we're doing this unit, it looks a little bit different, behaves a little bit differently. So let's have a chat about that. We're talking about views. Everything we're doing today is related to views. So let's recap real quickly, right? We're building MVC apps where the V stands for view. And what is the role of a view in the MVC model? What's the view's job? Show the user stuff. Yeah, that's what the user is going to look at. It's the external facing portion of your application, right? And so then what files in our project are then related to that? What files are we manipulating to change our views? HTML, all the HTML stuff. And that was true actually of Unit 2 as well. We had HTML files we were creating in Flask too. The difference is how we interact with those HTML files. And so we introduced a framework called Timeleaf in this set of prep work, which does a lot of the same stuff that we were doing in HTML files in Flask, right? Again, it's just the syntax looks a little bit different. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, so
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Timeleaf and Jinja are two different ways of accomplishing the same goal, which is allowing us to have some flexibility when creating views for our applications and doing things like what you can see what we're going to talk about, making loops and passing parameters around and things like that. Yeah, go ahead.
We were like buying all the HTML in the same file as our
Yes. Yeah.
Reviewing the data, like concatenating it all together. So I guess this time we allow us to do that like in the HTML document.
That is one of the main benefits of using Timeleaf and Jinja, yes, is keeping our views, the code for our views, separate from the code for the models and the controllers as well. That's a good practice to get into, this practice of separation of concerns, which is a term I believe has been mentioned a couple times in the prep work before today. So really identifying, all right, what is this part of my app responsible for, and making sure that it is focused solely on that thing and it is not, worrying about what the other parts of the app are doing, right? It might have to communicate, might have to pass some information back and forth. In fact, you can see that's a question that I'm going to ask you here in just a second. But really, the controller is responsible for handling the logic. The view is responsible for handling how data is displayed, right? The model is responsible for handling how data is stored, those kinds of things. So then, I just mentioned a second ago, controllers and views do have to talk to each other, right? View describes how we want to display data, but at some point in time, the controller has to provide some information to the view to be displayed. in order for the view to do its job. And so how does that work? What am I going to see in the code if I need to pass some stuff from the controller to the view? Model? Yeah, I believe that's right. So there was an object, right? There's an object in the code that I could use whose sole purpose in life was to act as sort of this middleman between the controller and the view. And I could put anything that I wanted to into that object. I could pass strings, I could pass, I think we were doing lists of cheeses, right? In the prep work, and we'll pass more and more complex things to that model as time goes on. It behaves in very much the same way as Jinja did, right? So when I actually render the template, what happens is that it's going to look for the models, it's going to look in the model to see if it has any values that match the placeholders in my time-leaf templates and substitute those values in. That might include executing a for loop, right? Or some other kind of construct like that. We saw actually that exact thing happen in the prep work, running for loops, and you can see that's actually my next question. How does time loop do for loops? What does that look like? Or not even necessarily for loops. Do I see the word for? No. Do I see the word while? No. What word do I see instead? Each. Yeah, the word each. And if it helps you make the connection, right? Every time I see that word each, I actually think for each, right? I'm trying to make that connection between the time loops, each word, and the for loops that I'm used to working with in Java and Python and stuff like that. So I really treat it like a for each loop. For each item in this list, create a tag and put some stuff inside of the tag, right? We don't actually see the loop spelled out in quite the same way. In fact, if we think about the types of loops that we've seen in Java, the for each loop looks most like what kind of loop? There's a special name for it in Java. Am I looping by index? By sequence, by value. I'm looping through all the values in the list. There's no indexes involved, right? For each item in the list, do this thing. In Java, we'd call that an enhanced for loop. I know I brought this up, I guess it would have been last week when we were talking about loops. We see that colon notation, right? Java can do that colon notation for this value, colon, this list, do some stuff. But notice that we don't see things like curly braces. Those weren't involved at all. So there's no body of the loop. Instead, what I'm repeating is just the tag that the loop is a part of. So in the prep work, we saw that the tag in question was a list item tag, right? And so for every cheese value on the list, it repeated that list item tag, created one list item tag for each element on the list. And so that's how all loops are gonna work in Timely, because it's just gonna repeat whatever tags we want to make it happen. Are there any questions about that? Loops are pretty tricky, and time leaf in general I feel like is a little trickier to wrap your brain around than some of the Jinja stuff that we did. I don't think that's, if you're looking at time leaf and thinking, man, I miss Jinja, you're not alone. You're not the only person thinking that. So let me know if you're having trouble kind of syncing those two concepts up. What does request param do? Actually, before that, what is request param? Request param is what construct? Yeah, but that's true. So that's what rest param does. But what is rest param code-wise? I would call that it's an annotation, right? It's an annotation. The @ sign out in front is a dead giveaway. That's an annotation. So it's an annotation that does what you explained, right? Where it's mapping what value to what value? It's really a mapping, right? It's taking a value from one place in my code and mapping it to another place. What are those two places? The view and the controller, where the view side, it's really coming from what, probably? So view, we can be more specific about the view side, right? It is coming from a view, but more specifically, what part of a view is it coming from? A form, yeah, a form. And you said request, which is actually also correct, right? Because what happens when I submit a form, it packages those values up into a request and ships it back. So request is also correct in that sense as well. But really it originates from the form. And then on the controller side, where's it ending up? The handler, yeah. It's ending up in the handler as a method parameter to the handler. So it's just a handy way of, again, mapping content from my form to my handler on the controller side. And it does that by looking at the names, right? The name that I have labeled on the form matches the name of the parameter that I have listed for my handler. We don't have to use this, of course. We actually saw last week how we could use, request.get, I think, or something similar along those lines, and we could use that as well. That's totally possible. This is a little shortcut. This is a little bit of a shortcut. How do I perform a redirect? How do I do a redirect in my code? Or really, we could take a step back a second, right? In Jinja, remember that what we had to do, basically at the end of every handler, we had to do one of two things. We either had to redirect, or we had to render a template, right? The same thing is actually true of Jinja. Those things are true as well. At the end of a Jinja handler, I have to either redirect, or I have to render a template. So I'm asking you, how do we perform a redirect? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or you could do it inside Fragment where
do the action like I'm not sure I follow. Your first one is absolutely right. I'm not sure I follow the second point. Oh, I see what you're getting at. Yeah, well, that's true of all forms that we've seen, regardless of whether we're using Jinja or Timeleaf or anything like that. If I have an action listed along with my form, that's where I'm going after the form gets submitted. That's absolutely true. I don't know that that's I guess that's a redirect. I'm not sure what I would classify that as. But anyway, your first answer is the one I was really looking for, where I, at the end of a handler, I just simply return redirect : and then wherever I want them to go, right? Whatever the route is where I want them to end up. So that's how we do a redirect, but actually, let's talk about the other one for a second. How do I render a template? In Jinja 2, I rendered a template by saying, literally, render template, right? Pass all the stuff that I need to the template to be rendered. That's not how we see it here, though, right? That's not how we see it with Timeleaf. How do I render a template with Spring in Timeleaf? That's right. Yeah, it's just the name of the file that I want to render. It's just the name of the template. That's all I have to do to render that template. Spring's going to see that, okay, this is the template that I'm rendering. If there's any placeholders in that template, like we've seen, it will look those up in the model and substitute those in, right? And take care of the rest for me. So in that sense, it's a little bit more clear-cut, a little bit more straightforward. It's, obscuring some of what's actually happening, which is maybe a good thing, maybe a bad thing. You don't see as much out in the open. It does keep the code a little bit cleaner, though, as well. All right. Last Timeleaf related question. What is a fragment? What's the Jinja equivalent that we saw to a fragment? The base template, yeah. And we would extend that base template, right? So it's not quite the same. They feel actually a little bit different. Fragment feels a little bit different than what we saw with Jinja, but it's the same general idea. I'm going to use fragments when? When do I want to use a fragment? Yeah, go ahead.
When you have something in an HTML file that you want to have in several files,
Yeah.
you put it like in your base file,
Mhm.
and then you just reference it.
If I want to reuse something, yeah, over and over and over again. But unlike the Jinja templates, I don't really extend anything, right? It's more, I see fragments more as just like a list of, little pieces, little tags. And if I decide I want to use one, I can say, oh, hey, go to my list of fragments, find this one, and substitute it in here, right? It's a little bit different from the way that Jinja 2 does it, although the end result is more or less the same. I get to reuse the existing HTML code in many different templates. And so that's the big power of fragments. I do have a little exercise for us. Actually, I have some other stuff to talk about too. But before I do that, are there any questions about the time leaf stuff today? Please don't hesitate. I know time leaf is not easy. It's, I think, one of the trickier parts of the beginning of Unit 3. So if there's any questions, please let me know. All right. So real quick, before we do an exercise, I wanted to touch base with you again. Last time, I think, or the time before, I don't remember, I mentioned how, as we get closer and closer to the end of class, I want to talk more and more about how to make you more of a self-sustaining programmer, right? Where you can solve more and more problems on your own, and be more prepared when you ultimately end up getting a job somewhere and you don't have a large group of TAs and other students and people to help you. And so one of those things that I've actually already talked about, but I think it's worth reiterating, especially as we get into some of the later assignments of Unit 3, is how to report a problem. I talked about this way back in Unit 1, but reporting issues, reporting problems is something that happens all the time, right? All the time. So if you need to request somebody's assistance, or maybe it's not even your code, right? You're using somebody else's code and something goes wrong and you want to tell them that, hey, this thing went wrong. I want you to know about it so maybe you can fix it. There's a proper way to do that. There's a proper way to report that problem to somebody. And so the first thing you should do is explain, this is what I expected to happen in as much detail as you can, and this is what actually happened. So when I clicked on this button, I assumed that it was going to print out a message that says, hello, my name, right? But instead, what actually happened, the website just crashed. Or it said goodbye instead of hello. Or, describe what actually happened instead of what you expected to happen. You should list the steps that you would need to take to reproduce this. So tell somebody, right, here is what I did to make this problem happen. That might be simple, I clicked a button, or it might be like a 10-step process, right? First I loaded this, then I loaded this file and connected it over to this file over here, right? And then I clicked 3 buttons in this particular order. Be as specific as you possibly can be, because in order for somebody to fix the problem, one of the first things that they're going to want to do is recreate the problem. They're going to want to try and duplicate the problem themselves. If you get any error messages, you should definitely pass those along, or even look them up, right? And see if you can figure out what those error messages are trying to tell you. I know it's not always obvious, but the good news about error message is usually you're not the first person to get one. So you can Google it and see other people who've gotten that same message, and maybe the solutions that they tried will be applicable to you. And then, of course, you should always explain what you've already tried to solve this problem. I tried, the error message pointed me in this direction, so I tried changing these couple lines of code over here, but unfortunately it didn't work, or that made the problem worse, or, things like that. I would really like you to get practice doing this while you're still here in class. This is something that you're going to be doing on a regular basis if you get hired, if you're working out in the field. So it's good practice to start doing it now. If you're having trouble with your homework assignments, if you're having trouble with your studios or something in the prep work, right? Try and walk through this process when you're talking to your TAs, when you're talking to me, or when you're even talking to your other students, right? This is what I expected to happen, and it didn't happen this way. It happened, this other thing happened instead. And explain the steps. What have you already done to try to solve the problem? You may or may not have noticed that when you do ask me for help, or ask some of the TAs for help, we actually kind of walk you through this process, whether you're consciously aware that that's what we're doing or not. One of the first things that I'll ask people is, oh, can you show me what's happening, right? Can you expected that it was going to do this. Can you show me what it actually did? And then I can see the steps that you took to get there. And that kind of helps me narrow down, all right, the problem must be somewhere along this path, right? Somewhere along this trip through the code. Are there any questions about this? Yeah, what's up? Mm-hmm. Sure.
Is there like a best practice or specific software that enables you to like create your upload it to Slack or to Stack Overflow?
Sure. So the question was, is there an easy way to, send code to other people? And there's a couple ways you can do this, right? Some tools, like Slack is one of them. If I pull up Slack for this class, Slack and other messaging tools will have a way for you to paste code in a way that's easy to read. And what we really mean by easy to read is we really like having that monospace font. And so in Slack, I think, is it three little, those are called backticks, actually. So I know it's probably hard to see. I can try to zoom in a little bit here and see if maybe that helps. All right, I'll just put in a very simple line of code and then 3 more backticks to end it. And you can see that it puts it in a very nicely formatted way for code. Now, not all tools are going to be able to do this, right? So if you're using things that programmers usually use, and there's probably a way to do this, it's just a matter of figuring out what it is. It may not be 3 backticks, it might be something different. Oh, hi. Adam. What's up, buddy? So if that's not available to you, you've got a couple of other options. You could do something like a paste bin, or there's other websites that are similar that allow you to just dump in a big old chunk of text right here, and they give you a link so you can post the link, or you could even just take a screenshot of your code, right? And post the screenshot. That could work as well. So there are options available to you. It's a good thing to know how to do, though, because I can guarantee, I've seen it before plenty of times, right? People say, post the code section, and they just post it like they were doing it in a Microsoft Word document or something, and it's like, I'm not reading that. I'm not going through that. It looks like garbage. I don't know what's going on. You need to fix it. So it is important to know how to do stuff like that. Great question. Any other, oh boy. Any other questions? Yeah.
I was just going to add on, if you're on one of those tabs, there's a built-in tool called the Snipping Tool.
Oh, really?
Really nice, like just regular, you can select a rectangle or even just a specific window to take a screenshot of.
It's called the Snipping Tool?
Snipping Tool.
Do you have to like download it or something, or is it's just on there? Oh, interesting. I didn't know about that. Snipping Tool. There it is. Cool. Nice. Cool. Oh, I can draw on it? Highlighter, pen? Sorry, Party Parrot. Cool. Oh, nice. I generally don't like Word documents as a rule for, things other than writing papers, but yeah, I get it. Word documents and code really do not mix very well, so please, if you're thinking about using Microsoft Word to solve your code problems, think again. Oh, okay, now it's getting a little out of control.
What would you recommend in replacement?
I mean, you're going to be better. And so you don't want to use Word. I would use just a text editor. I use Notepad++, but there are a billion different text editors out there. Actually, Visual Studio Code that we had you install for Unit 2 is a very good one. I would say that's way better than Microsoft Word for this kind of stuff. You don't have to just use it for Python. It'll be happy with whatever you want in there. Yeah. Yeah, I don't use Word for much these days. I use it for writing exams, and that's about it. So, any other questions? I do have an exercise, but these questions are great, so keep them coming. I like talking about this kind of stuff. All right. Well, actually, I unintentionally pulled up the exercise that I wanted to do with you from the prep work, right? So the prep work had you go through, I think, 3 different steps to set up some views with your Spring app. And so I haven't actually started this running yet, but now might be a good time to do that real quick. And we can see that, oops, I went to the wrong one. Sorry. And so, hopefully you made it through those steps okay and got everything up and running, and it allows you to make a very simple app that just keeps a list of cheese. I mean, they don't have to be cheeses, right? But, it's whatever you want it to be. In this particular case, it's intended to be used for cheeses. And so it keeps a list of those things. And notice that, like we started out with Unit 2, it doesn't remember. If you shut the app down and start it up again, it doesn't remember. We haven't gotten to databases again yet. We're going to add databases back in pretty soon in the next few weeks. But for now, it doesn't bother remembering that stuff for us. And so what I wanted to do to wrap up, it's /cheese, isn't it? There we go. No cheese. All right, cool. Yeah. And so what I wanted to do oh my gosh. Okay. What I wanted to do to wrap up today was to go through this exercise that was presented to you and code it up together as a group. Maybe you did this already. If you did, great. I imagine there's probably people out there who did not do this yet, in which case we're gonna do it now. What we want to do is we want to update our list, not just to handle names of cheeses, but also include descriptions of those cheeses as well. And so they actually give us step-by-step instructions on what we need to do to make this happen. So we're just gonna kind of follow along with this list and take a little tour through our code and make the requested changes so that hopefully we get an acceptable result. So first thing that it has us do, right now, you'll recall, I have the code up here, that the way that we are storing all of this information is in an array list of strings, which is good if all we want to store is the names, right? But that's not all we want to do anymore. Now we want to store names and descriptions as well. So a list isn't going to cut it. And so there's a couple of options that we could do. One thing you could do is, all right, well, maybe I'll just make a second list for descriptions. And that could potentially work, actually. I could see that being okay, but the problem with that is that there's no direct tie between those two lists. And so if something gets out of sync, it's going to throw everything off, right? In other words, if I accidentally delete a value from one of the descriptions, then all the other descriptions aren't going to line up anymore, and there's going to be some cheese that doesn't have a description, and it's just going to be a big mess. So a more natural structure, I think, to use for this, and the prep work suggests doing this as well, is to use a hash map. We talked about hash maps last week. Dictionaries, if your brain is still working in Python mode. And so the first thing that we need to do is we're going to change this list into a hash map. And that alone, just switching out that word, should cause some problems. You can see that it's introduced some red into my code, meaning that that's broken some stuff. I'm not surprised. For starters, even this definition here is bad. Why? I need 2. Why do I need 2? Keys and values. So what are what are the types of the keys? So what are the keys and what are the values? Before we even worry about types, the keys would probably be the name of the cheese and the value will be the description, right? So what should the types then be? String, they can both be strings for sure. So I just need to specify that, all right, I've got strings. I also need to import this. It doesn't know what a hash map is, so I've showed you this trick before, I'll show you again. I don't need to type out the import statement. I could, but I don't need to. Instead, on a Windows machine, I can hit Alt-Enter, and you can see the first option is import class. So I'll just tell it to do that instead, and it wrote the import statement for me up here, right here, right? So I no longer, or so I don't have to worry about that part. Looks like I need to change this language over here too, right? To say hash map. Okay. So I have successfully changed my array list to be a hash map, but we're still not done. There's still some problems that have resulted due to this hash map. If I scroll down a little bit, you can see now that, oh, here's a problem, cheeses.add. Well, there is no add on a hash map. What's the closest equivalent to add with a hash map? Put. And so I need to put a key and a value, right? I need to put a key and a value. So I can switch this to put. And cheese name is good for the key, but then what do I put in for the value? I don't have a description yet that I can put here. So I think that's probably our next step, is we actually need to add in the ability for people to tell me a description and then grab that information so that I can store it in the hash map with everything else. So what do I need to modify in order to do that? I want to allow people to type in a description as well as a name. My form. I need to go modify my form. So here's my form, and I need another input here. I'll just copy the one that I have and then change it. Cheese description. And then I should probably include some labels as well, right? So that they know which box is which. So okay. And if I wanted to, I could, take a look at this real quick and make sure that it looks okay by saving everything and restarting my app. We're not done yet. Actually, it may not work since we're not done yet. So I have a syntax error in my code over here that I forgot about. Whoops. So I've updated my form. How do I then get that value out of my form? What do I need to do? Another request param. I already have one for the name. Is there anything stopping me from having a second one? Nope, definitely not. I can put in another request param, string, cheese description. Question was, why do I always lowercase the first word and capitalize the second? That's typical Java naming conventions. I believe that's called camel case, is that right? Yeah. So first letter is always going to be lowercase unless, when do I capitalize the first letter? Class names. Yeah, if it's the name of a class, I capitalize the first letter. This is not the name of a class. This is the name of a parameter / variable. So that first letter is usually going to be lowercase, and then I'll capitalize the first letter of the next word to help me see the end of one word and the beginning of another. It's a little different than how we did things in Python, although I don't know if you noticed or not that I still kind of did this sometimes in Python just because it's been so burned into my brain. Python actually prefers to use underscores in between words a lot of times. And if you're looking for, more silly things that people fight about, just go look up, naming conventions on the internet, and you'll see lots of people arguing about things that kind of matter, but not really. My take on the whole thing is that it's important to be consistent, right? If you don't like using camel case, I'm not going to complain. I think it's a little unusual for people not to use camel case with Java. It doesn't bother me personally as long as you're consistent and you're not doing sometimes using camel case and sometimes using, underscores. Like, don't switch back and forth. Pick one and do that thing. If you get a job somewhere, you may not have a choice. They may tell you that you need to do it a certain way to keep everything consistent across everybody working on every project. Good question. So now I have this second request param, and so now I can actually go back here, and I have this value now, right? Cheese description. There we go. Okay. So now I don't see any errors, so now I can try and do what I was doing before, which is running it just to see how we've gone. Test what we've done so far. See how it's going. All right, I think it's going. I'll refresh this page here. No cheese. All right, that's fine. Let's add one. Name, description. Cool. Looks good. Cheddar, yellow. Oh, yeah. Okay, and so it kind of worked. This doesn't look too great, though, in my opinion. It looks a little eh. What actually happened here? What am I looking at? Before, when I rendered this template, I was passing in a list. And it was making a list item for every element, right? But I'm not passing in a list anymore, correct? I'm now passing in, whoops, not that one, sorry, up here. I'm now passing in a hash map. And when I print out the values of a hash map, those are called entries. Those are called entries. I'm printing out the entries, which are key value pairs, and this is what they look like, which I'm not satisfied with. I'd like to tweak this a little bit to make it look a little bit better. So I'm going to go into my template and see if I can format this a little bit differently. I really have two values now, right? I have the key and the value, key value pairs. So it'd be nice if I could actually make a spot for both of those things to live instead of just having, them all treated as one big chunk. And actually, the prep work does, or the exercise gives you a big push here. This chunk of code is very interesting to take a look at right here. And so we've abandoned the list and instead moved in favor of a table. So we moved in favor of a table, and it's showing us how we can use TimeLeaf to loop over a hash map. I'm going to say for every map item within my map, and then use .key and .value to get me the corresponding part that I think about, right? When I had on a list, I didn't have .key and .value, but I've switched it to a hash map. Now I have a key and a value, and I can access those independently and format them independently if I want to. I'm actually going to copy this chunk of code over, although it's not going to work as is. We'll have to tweak it a little bit. So the list is going to go away. I'm going to replace it with a table instead. And so what are some things that I need to take a look at here? What do I need to change? The name of... So right now, I'm not passing anything in called map, right? I'm passing in something called cheeses. And I could change this to be a little bit more specific. Instead of saying map item, I could say cheese. Oops. And then I'd have to change all of these as well, right? There's a little bit of HTML missing here as well. What would I need to do to satisfy the HTML? I know we haven't worked with tables too much, have we? Some of you I know have, just from experimenting with your HTML me something and stuff. Yeah. I need the table tag, yeah. Table, and you can see it automatically filled in the closing one for me, but I want that to go down here. Okay, I get it. All right. So what's this loop saying? What is it going to repeat? It's going to repeat a table row for every single entry in the map, and that row is going to contain 2 cells, right? One for the key and one for the value. So think about that for a second. It's not just repeating this tag, but it's repeating all other tags that are inside of it as well. That's something to keep in mind when you're using the each keyword with time-leaf. It's not just repeating the tag that it's a part of, but it's repeating any other tags that are inside of that tag too, until it runs out of items. And so actually, to really make this complete, what I might want to do at the very beginning is add a header, right? So that I know what I'm looking at. So I'm going to add one more row with a header that says name and another one that says description. Something like this. Actually, let's make it bold while we're at it, just to make it stand out a little bit more. Just make it bold. Oh, come on. IntelliJ just assumes that. There we go. Now let's take a peek. Let's see if this actually looks a little bit better now. All right, so it's yeah, okay. Yeah, kind of looks a little better. We're moving in the right direction. And so I can add more cheeses, right? Ew. No, I didn't say that. Delicious? Question mark? I should have put like, not a cheese. I don't know. I'm getting myself into trouble. I'm not from St. Louis, if you can't tell. But it appears to be doing its job. Swiss. Holy. All right, cool. Appears to be doing what I told it to do.
Go back to the index really quickly.
This is the index, isn't it? Oh, you mean the code?
The code, yeah.
I heard another question over there. Why did it put Swiss in the middle? Does anybody know why it put Swiss in the middle? Yeah. Hash maps don't have an order associated with them, so the order that I add things is not necessarily the order that they're going to come back out. Yeah. You cannot assume that a hash map is going to be presented to you in any particular order.
Can you make it have order?
You can. How would I make it have an order? Anybody know? So I think you're probably right. I think maybe there is a different version of a hash map that does keep things in a particular order, but I don't think you necessarily even need that. What you could do instead is pull out the keys, sort the keys, and then look up the values in sorted order that way. There's a method to get the keys, right? Where's my map? Cheeses dot key set. There we go, key set. And then you could sort that. And then just go through the sorted list and look up values in that order if you really wanted to. Yeah?
Could be very vague, but somewhere I use Iterator.
Ah, an iterator. Yeah. So an iterator, I think, though, is not going to guarantee that things appear in a particular order. An iterator, which I don't think it was introduced in the prep work anywhere, but since we're on the topic, an iterator is just an object that allows us to traverse through a collection. The nice thing about an iterator as opposed to like a for loop, right? If I use a for loop or something, I set up the parameters and then the for loop just goes. You can think of it like those old wind-up toys, right? I wind up the toy and then it just goes until it's done. Whereas with an iterator, I have a little bit more control over it. I can say, give me another one, give me another one, give me another one. Oh, wait a second, this one's gonna take me a little bit longer to do some stuff with. Let me go do some other stuff for a little while, and then come back to your iterator and say, all right, I'm ready for the next one now, I'm ready for the next one. So it's not like an all or nothing situation, like a for loop is. Be happy to chat with anybody about iterators if they're curious about them in more detail. Great questions. Does anybody have any other questions? I think we satisfied the terms of the exercise, so I'm gonna wrap this one up here. There were some other things that you could do, right, as part of the prep exercises, but this is what I have planned for today. Does anybody have more questions? Yeah. Uh-huh.
Also a route associated with right below the controller
Mm-hmm.
right there. What's the purpose?
Yeah, can somebody explain this to me? What's this guy doing? We actually saw this earlier when I first loaded up the app. I made a mistake. It's a base route. So basically, any routes that I'm setting here have this tacked on to the front. So I could have accomplished the same thing if I wanted to by taking that line of code out and then just typing the word cheese on every single other route that I have, right? That would get me to the exact same place. So it's just a little bit of a shortcut. Oh, I don't want to have to type the word cheese in front of every single route here. I'm just going to type it once at the beginning of the file, and that will be added on to the beginning of every single route that is in this file.
I guess my question is simply the routes that are associated without the base.
You can, and maybe I wasn't clear. I'd have to then come back here to all of these routes and type cheese in front of it, each one, right? And so I'm already tired of this, and it's only the third one. That's what we're trying to get away from, is having to, if I have a common prefix that I want to appear in front of every route, I don't need to type that out every single time. I can type it out once at the top of the file. That also makes it easier later if I decide that I want that prefix to change. I then don't have to visit every single route and change it in every single place. I can just change it once at the top of the file, and then it automatically is going to update every single other route that I have in the file. Programmers are notoriously lazy, and this is just another example. We don't want to have to type that stuff out over and over again. Yeah.
So, like, what's the point of having
It could be, if you wanted it to be. It could be. But for larger sites in particular, I'm probably going to have multiple sections, and I'm going to want to group those sections. I'm not going to want to dump all of my controllers into one file. I'm going to have one set of controllers that handles this part of the website, one that handles this part of the website, right? Separate it out. Yeah, good question. I mean, you know, just because we're doing it this way, it doesn't mean we can't do it a different way. There's almost always going to be a different way we can do it, for sure. Any other questions? Any other questions? So you've got an assignment due today. So get that demoed if you're ready, or if you're not quite ready, let us know how we can help you get that finished up so that we can get you demoed and moving on to the next one. And then if you're all square on assignments, there's also a studio to work on today, which we will cover at the usual time, around 8 o'clock. Thanks, everybody. I can't quite hear it. Maybe come up here and...